Howdy, howdy, y'all. Welcome back to Semantics. Today I am joined by the absolutely delightful Adrianne Mallett. Adrian, how's it going?
Howdy. It's going great, and I'm really excited to be here.
I'm really excited to have you. You are just an absolute delight to chat with, and I know you've got just some absolutely lovely thoughts about programming, about software development, um, in particular around the space of test-driven development, which I know we'll get to. But first, I'd love for you to have the chance to introduce yourself for people who might not know who you are.
Yeah. Um, well, hey everyone. I am Adrian, and this is my first time on Twitch. Feel like a movie star. I'm a software engineer, and my team used to get a blend of front end and back end work. So I have really enjoyed with the front end work, but I've been a Java developer for really like the last couple years, and um, what's interesting is that when I started working professionally out of college, um, I did not live in the land of TDD or test driven development. And then in about 2019, my dev team, we went to some training on it and we were skeptical, but we tried it out. And I won't say we loved it on the first day, but I think within a week. We really fell in love. And I'm hoping to just kind of share some of what I've learned, take some spicy questions. I love a healthy challenge. So if you came here today and you already have, some opinion about TDD, you might not like it. I am so open to hearing why that is. It'd be cool to have a dialogue and maybe your frustration is one that I know. Maybe I worked through it, or maybe it's a residual frustration, and we can say about the challenges of TDD. But in my personal opinion, the benefits of TDD they really do outweigh the drawbacks. So I'm excited to talk about it, the theory. But we're gonna demo today. It'll be so fun. We're gonna pair program with Ben.
All right. Well, it's great to have you, and chat. It's great to have y'all as well. I want to call out some of the people I'm seeing. I see Joe, I see Matt, I see Chan, codelex, Pritam. Welcome, welcome. It's great to have y'all. Great to have you here. Um, yeah. So you're a huge proponent of TDD, as we've all seen, and I would love to just kind of start with the question of what does test-driven development mean to you, Adrian?
Um, I really associate it with quality. Not just in like the more obvious way, which is high test coverage is often trusted. And we say like, oh, if code has that, it must be quality. I mean, maybe not. It's so possible to write a garbage test just to get the coverage. So that's not always true, but like the quality that I think about is like when it scales. And so the magic of TDD and like why I fell in love during that week was I realized how TDD is helpful when you need to collaborate with others. And that could be at work on your dev team. But I mean, maybe if it's open source or a project you're building with a friend, there's something really helpful about TDD to kind of make to go along with your code and make those commits and check-ins like trustworthy. Because I can tell you, I can say, hey Ben, I wrote this, it does what I say, trust me. Or I can show you test suites, and that's really helpful, to back me up.
All right. Um, so if I were interested in, writing good tests and getting started with test-driven development, where might I start?
Um, so yeah, so hopefully for today, maybe you do have some prior knowledge of software testing. If not, I'll drop the Wikipedia page to it in our chat, and um, that would be like its whole thing to go and learn about. But so if you're familiar with software testing, um, as far as test-driven development, um, that is kind of interesting. So test-driven development I did not invent it. I am posturing myself like I know a lot about it, but like I really know the tip of the iceberg compared to how much is out there. Like it's something that's really been vetted and studied, and they've done the cost benefit analysis of it, and it comes originally from extreme programming. So I'm also going to be dropping in the chat the Wikipedia page for test-driven development, because if you're into like computer science history, it is an interesting read. It's been around since the 90s, and it's important to know that there are different flavors of it, like so many other things in programming. So, calling that out, like if you had an experience trying TDD in the past, it left a bad taste in your mouth, it could have been the way that you were implementing it. And so just have awareness that there's different styles of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. We already have a question. This is from Pritam. Pritam's asking, when you start with test-driven development, it feels like it's holding you back and taking some time to get used to. How do you overcome that?
That is so fair. Yeah, you're actually gonna see in the code today that like the process, it can feel cumbersome. It can feel unnecessary. It can feel like a $10 solution to a 10-cent problem. And at first it kind of is. And we're going to write something simple today, so it's going to seem like overkill. But once you get into a rhythm, you do get so much faster at it. And the value of TDD isn't always obvious, that first day. It might be the next day when either you go back and revisit it. It's so lovely to see the documentation of your thought process in those forms of tests. You can see where you left off. It's also really lovely if you're sharing a code base, because your tests, they're living, right? Like they are the specifications of the business logic, where you were going with it. And so why am I talking about that? Because that saves you time. So it might seem like it's taking you longer at the time of writing, but you're going to save time later when you're context switching. Um, Maybe you write code, go to a meeting, come back. TDD helps to have those test suites, or maybe that example of it's the next day or after a long weekend or vacation. Um, Also, it saves you time in another really key area, and that is debugging. Mm-hmm. The tests give you such a short feedback loop that, like, yes, you can look at logging and you can do console logs, but the tests are really helpful to speed up your debugging. Mm-hmm.
All right. Chan is asking, in testing UI code, what level or levels do you like to test at? For instance, end to end, visual regression, unit, etc.
Okay, thank you for asking this. So, there's a whole world of testing. And so you, either as part of a dev team or as an individual, you're going to need a holistic approach to testing. If you think that just TDD and just unit testing is enough, it might be, but it's probably not. And so, you're right. You'll want to get the right testing in the right areas, and the right amount in the right areas. So like with end to end, I really love end to end to make assertions about a user's experience. And I like end to end testing for those integration pieces of where your code has, it's either passing off to something else or you have a dependency you're bringing in. So the TDD cycle that we're doing today, Chan, is going to be unit testing, but it is possible to do an end-to-end cycle of TDD. And yeah, just to explain what that would look like, it would be like end-to-end is the overarching, but then you've got lots of rapid unit testing TDD cycles within it, and then another end-to-end. And if that does not make sense, I will have to pontificate later. Yeah. Oh, and then with visual regression, I think that kind of ties into it. Yeah. Also, the testing trophy, if you haven't Googled that before, I know like that's very respected in our React community if you're a front end programmer. Was there another question you wanted to call out, Ben?
Um, yeah, and I also know that like we have some code demos that we want to get to, so we may also circle back to some tests. Is
Yeah.
this the
Okay, I
trophy,
like
right?
that plan.
Yeah, here's can't see Dodds on the trophy as well. Um,
Thank you.
so yeah, and then I guess one more question before we dive into the code, and then I'll circle back to other questions that we've got throughout. Codelex is asking, can you please give us some recommendations for time estimation between code plus TDD and testing? So how long does it take, or maybe in general, if I can generalize that question, how much of your time is spent with the tests versus with the code that actually gets delivered?
Um, that's like kind of hard. I would almost say it just depends too much. It varies wildly.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you could get stuck debugging on one side versus the other on in your source code or in your test. But because you're rapidly switching back and forth, I feel like the balance really works its way out, and maybe you'll kind of see it in the demo. And I know that this chat will persist, so I'll come try to find you and give you like a longer answer later.
All right. Let's hop into the code, and if you've got questions, feel free to leave them in there, and we will definitely circle back. I know that there's already questions in there that we're not getting to quite yet, but we will definitely circle back to those. And Adrian is also in real time dropping a whole bunch of resources. All right, so you gave me a repo. You gave me some starter code here. Let me go ahead and refresh this so you can see this. And actually, chat, we're immediately going to enlist y'all's help because we're struggling to even get this running for some reason. So we have just installed. We have a package JSON that looks like this. We're saying it's a type module. We have a npm run test script that'll run jest. Then we have here's our .test file, which is importing a tunabet dependency from the tunabet JS, and that looks like this. And yet, maybe what I need to do is just kind of pull some of this stuff off to the sides. And yet, whenever I run npm run test, we're getting some. Oh, you know what? I bet
It's
you if I rename this MJS, that might do it. Let's try this.
fingers crossed. I hope so.
Do it, do it, do it. Oh no.
No.
Cannot use import statement outside a module. Um, if anyone has any clue how to help with this would be amazing. Both Adrian and I have had very busy mornings, so we haven't necessarily been able to get this code up and running. Well, you know what? I think I have a pivot, which is that we don't have to
Okay.
import this from another file. In fact, let me delete this, and instead what we'll do is we'll have one big file. Pridum's saying try module.exports. That could also work. I think this is probably going to be the fastest, and that way also we just have
Okay.
one file. So I can spell function, I promise. Chan, we do have type module in the package JSON. I think we'll
Thank you for the suggestion.
Yes, thank you so much, both of y'all. I think this is probably how we'll do it, is we'll define our tunabet function up here, and then we can use it down here. That way we don't
Okay.
have to play around with modules.
Yeah. So, do you mind opening this file up twice and we can have it still open side by side to kind of see the test split screen with the source code?
I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see.
Okay.
Yes, that works.
So that is my first like huge tip is if you're doing this, it can be frustrating and disorienting to bounce around all your files. So I really love to have the source code next to the test code, the matching one. Yeah.
So I'll
Okay.
collapse the. Ooh, exciting. Always an adventure with the SCAP. Okay, so
And
it's one
we have
file, but
okay.
yep.
We need to state the problem. They don't
Yeah.
know what we're trying to do today.
That's true. Would you be my product owner, please?
Okay, so the challenge is um, today we're going to tuna bin. What is tuna bin? Tuna bin is like Fizz Buzz, but way better because you get tuna and also bin. So
And also Ben.
yeah, so if you're familiar with this popular exercise, we're going to print numbers like 1 through 100, but special rules. Okay, so if the number is a multiple of 3, we want to print tuna, and if it's a multiple of 5, we're going to print bin, return bin, and then if it is a multiple of both 3 and 5, tuna bin. Yeah.
All right. We've got some love for this. Matt saying high energy testing. And Joe says love it. Yes, absolutely. All right. So where do you want to get started?
Yeah. So the cycle in TDD that you will hear is red, green, refactor. So red
Okay.
means we write a failing test. We get some red in our terminal. And then green means get it passing. So you would do the simplest possible code to get it passing. Like even if it's comical, like just write really bad, not elegant code. Because the third step is refactor. And refactor is your chance to like stop being so tactical, be a bit more strategic. I like to refactor after I have about like 3 things. Usually like 3 tests kind of testing the same thing. And you'll see that in a minute. Okay, so red, green, refactor. So first is red. So we need a failing test. And Ben is showing on his screen, like this is like a template that I sent over. Okay, I love this. You can test however makes sense for you. I like to do the acronym SEATS, like take a seats. Um, S is for setup, E is for exercise, A is for assertion, and T is for teardown. So to quickly go over that, sometimes your setup is simple, sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have like mocking, dependency injection. It can be kind of messy.
Mm-hmm.
Exercise is where you might call your method or test whatever the unit test is over. And then assertion, that's the line of code where you're actually trying to pass. And teardown. Teardown is not always required. It usually would be like in mocking, for example.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so let's set up the test. Okay, so this test is written. So we named it on line 6. A tip is in your tests, not in your code, but in your tests, clarity is so much more valuable than brevity. And what I mean by that is give it a very specific name. And it's okay if it's long, but state like high level
Mm-hmm.
in plain language what you expect to happen. So we're expecting to get tuna if we give it the number 3. Yep. And so for the setup, we just have an expected is we're expecting tuna, and our actual is calling our source code on 3. Okay, so we're ready to run it. Let's see if it's read. Oh, you did. One failed.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, where did it fail? Did it fail at the assertion or in the build?
So it's failing at the assertion.
Okay. And that's your goal. And so sometimes it'll fail. The arrow, the cursor will be higher in the file. That just means you haven't really made even the file yet. But Ben kind of did that housekeeping. Yeah. So this is great. We want it to fail at the assertion. So Ben, you need to write the simplest thing to make this test pass.
Okay.
What? Yeah.
So the test here says should return tuna if given 3. So here's what I'm thinking is I'm gonna get a number, and then I am a massive nerd for JSOX. So I'll do fizz buzzable number. That'll help me keep track of some of the types. I'm gonna give me a little more room. So I'm gonna say, let's see, it should return tuna if given 3. So if num equals 3, return tuna. So this is the simplest possible assertion I can think of. And I'll run this test.
You're
And
my
I'm getting some passes.
yeah. So I want to point out that you could have done something even simpler. You don't really need line 6. You could just return tuna.
Oh.
I won't
Okay.
make you delete it, but that I'm so glad you did that, because that's a natural tendency in TDD, which is you're not really racing ahead, you're just thinking ahead because you're a great programmer. Like, so a lot of us, when we see these problems, we abstract the logic in our head so fast that the simplest thing we think of is not truly the simplest. Like, you took a really small step, but you got to take the very, very smallest step. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, depending on if you're pair programming or if you're working by yourself, you can be a purist about that if you want. Yeah, okay. So anyway, I like this. We can leave it. And so to repeat the cycle, red, green, we're at green. It's not time to refactor yet because we don't have multiples of these. So we need to write the next failing test. So in IntelliJ, you can just like copy the block of code and you can actually Command D and it will duplicate it, or however you like to copy paste.
Okay.
But we're just gonna change the test. And the stumbling block here is when you copy and paste your test, always rename it, because you do not want multiple tests with the same name. Also, if you change the logic of your test but not the name, your test is now a lie. So
Okay.
yeah, so we need to name this test.
Okay, so I'm copying this test that we've got down here, and I should put it down here.
Yeah, but actually on the bottom is like a simpler format. I'm really cool with either. Do you want to do my seat formatting, or do you want to do like the shorter?
Let's play around with seat, because I've never actually seen it structured like that, and I like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and nuke this one because we've seen that. Okay, so should return tuna if given 3. However, this is a duplicated test, so we're writing a new test. What is this new test?
Well, let's continue to drive out the logic of all the times that we would want to get tuna. So, pair programming partner, tell me any other time that we would expect to get tuna. So any other multiple of 3. It can be any.
It would be 6, or I could expect on 27, 51, so many. So, I'm not writing a test for every one of those, am I?
You're going to write about 3. Yep.
Okay.
Yep, and it's gonna seem tedious and overkill, but just bear with me. Like you'll love it in the end. Yeah.
It'll seem tedious, but it'll actually be TDD. Oh god. Execution. TDD. Oh yes, that's hard.
TDD. Yes. Oh my gosh.
There we go. All right.
So you can make it say 6, and then So yep, and now make the logic match. Yep, and run it, and it'll probably be like a freebie, meaning it won't be failing because you already wrote line 7 on the left. But remember, if we had done the simplest implementation and you had it always returning, actually, wait, it did fail. Okay, we're good. So yeah, so now we need to like write some logic. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because I was checking if num is exactly 3, not divisible.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, that totally makes sense. Okay, so let's write simple code. Try not to be elegant. We want to get tuna if this is true. If we get 6.
Okay, so you're trying to be. We're starting inelegant here, so I could just say if num equals 6.
Yep, and that counts. So now we move on. And I hope we're getting faster, and like if you get into a rhythm, you can really go fast with this. Yeah. So now third test, you can duplicate the test and you can rename it. But we want to do like another case for multiples of 3. So you said 27 earlier. Let's just do that one. Let's say that it should return tuna if given 27.
Hello, we got bots. Hang on. We got bots.
What?
We did it! We
Oh
did
my
it!
gosh. Wait,
Let
does
me...
that mean
We...
they're trying to see Tuna?
You know, always. Warning, spammer here. Yeah, we got 2 bots in one go. Y'all, we've hit it. Yes, bots very
Yeah.
excited to see Tuna.
Do we show them the Tuna?
Uh, as in the Tuna command. We got a few Tunas in the chat coming. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. So we have... Oh,
I hope that we've appeased them.
you know what? We're done here, Adrian.
Yeah, I came prepared because I knew that your Twitch fans loved the Tuna, so I thought they'd want to see it. Maybe I'll just put it. Yeah. Okay. While that was distracting, good thing we can context switch back to our code and we can see from where we left off in the test.
That was a world class
yeah.
segue. Incredible.
But seriously, like this, it's beautiful. It's so true. So we just read the test that was like failing. Oh, they're all passing. So then we were trying to write the third one. Yeah, and we said 20. We said 27. Remember?
Yep. So let me do that, and then.
And it's 12:27. Make a wish.
I wish that this test would pass. You know, I'm very, very worried about the state of this test. Pritam is complimenting you on your nice save. All right. Yeah. So
yeah.
already
so now you're allowed. You can refactor now.
Yeah,
and
I was thinking like
itching to. Yeah.
I've been ready. You know. Okay, so the way I would write this is I would use the modulo operator. So I would say if the remainder of num divided by 3 is 0. That's how I would do this. Is that expressive enough for you? Is that how you would write that?
I like it. I like it.
Okay.
So, what was the next rule? We have Tuna. Now we need Ben. So, do you remember when we want Ben to?
Yeah, it's when the number is divisible by 5, right?
Yep. So, again, you can copy your test, and
right.
We'll rename it. And yeah.
All right.
And so we can do 5 for the first one because 5 is a multiple of 5.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and yep, instead of Tuna, it's Ben. Yep. Great job.
All right. So now, obviously, this is not. Nope. Sorry. We want if num equals 5.
Yeah. Yep. Not gonna be a hard habit to break. So that's a little bit of a mindset shift.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here like it almost feels like there's definitely that barrier there of like, oh, it feels like I'm almost like a waste of time, and I know it's not, but like it's like I know the solution here. I should hop right in.
Maybe on a day like this with a problem like this, that would seem appropriate. Remember though, you might have a more complex thing that you're coding, and this project might grow a lot. You might start introducing a lot of functionality. You might have more UI going on, and you might be sharing the code base. So I don't blame you if you're not impressed yet. It's day one. I think it can take a little bit to see the value. Yeah. But okay, cool. We have 4 tests passing. So with the cycle, remember before how we did like 2 more cases for 3? You can do 1 at a time, or if you are feeling risky, you could write 2 tests at once and see if we can jump from 4 passing tests to 6.
Do it.
Yeah.
So I feel.
And so this is an advanced move, y'all.
We're leveling up.
It's probably it's sort of risky to be doing it when you're new to TDD, but I want you to see that there is potential to speed up the process.
Okay.
And yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Cool.
Right, and then the last one was 95. I guess I should have demonstrated those tests failing first, but
yeah. Okay, I'm so glad. I'm so glad you caught that. The reason that it's red, green refactor and not just red, 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 run them all,
Mm-hmm.
is because if you have failing tests, it is tricky to debug. Like it's not isolated. You won't know exactly where to go. You'll have multiple failing tests. But when you just have one test failing at a time, it's to use a metaphor, it's like that smoke test for your car. Like you see where that smoke is.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. And so, but that's cool. You caught it. And yeah. And one more thing, I never trust a test that I haven't seen fail before because
Okay.
it is possible to write, a test that is always true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you're in a hurry. There's lots of reasons why. But yeah, so that's why we do try to do red, then green, then refactor. Okay, cool.
That yeah, I feel like this is pushing up against my base, like my base impulses in a way that I'm finding very interesting. And I'm gonna, after we get off this call, I'm gonna have like a nice long think for the rest of the day. Um, yeah. So Chan says the value that I found in starting from the simplest case is that I actually cover the simplest case. It's
Yeah.
easy to bias towards the quote dynamic case and miss the obvious cases. Matt says, I feel called out. I only write tests that pass.
That's funny. And yeah, to just complement like that idea of like the simplest things, I'm gonna drop a link now. This is Sandy Metz refactoring a Gilded Rose exercise. It's a more like complex example than what you're seeing today. Maybe check that out later if like you're feeling intrigued.
Okay.
But so Ben, you've got 6 passing tests, and you have 3 for the case of 5. You're allowed to refactor. So
Oh,
did you already refactor or not yet? I'm
not
trying to
yet.
look. Okay, so now you can refactor. And today, Ben is driving and I'm only navigating. But if we were really pair programming, you can gamify this by ping ponging off of each other. And what I mean by that is I could write a test and then I could be like, okay, Ben, your turn, get it passing. And then it becomes fun because the by doing the least amount of work, the simplest thing to get it passing, it kind of is like that fun banter back and forth of like you build up your test suite like
Mm-hmm.
really quickly, writing all these tests, and it can be fun for pair programming. Okay, so we refactored. Do you remember the third piece of the acceptance criteria?
Yes. So if it's divisible by both 3 and 5, we say tunabet.
Tunabin. Okay, so let's write a failing test. So
All right.
red, yeah.
So I would say if. Wait, nope, that's not it. It's it. It should. Do the quotes. That's the quotes. Should return tuna ben
Yep.
if given 15. Start the test closure, and then uh, I'll go through the steps. I won't have the comments, but const expected equals tuna ben.
Tunabin.
Const actual equals tuna ben with 15. Then expect actual to be.
Expected.
Yep. And we already know that this is going to fail. My prediction is it's going to get tuna. Joe says, I really like the self documentation part of writing these tests.
That's awesome. I like it too. Okay, so what we are doing now, Ben, is like we're being forced to refactor because we introduced a new functionality
Mm-hmm.
that competed with the existing functionality. And this is a small example, but if you've ever played in a more mature code base, doesn't even have to be legacy, just something that's, more than one file. You
Mm-hmm.
have likely caused a defect before because you forgot about the existing logic. Or you didn't forget about it totally. You just you thought you remembered it correctly. So you appended some new logic and then it yeah, there could be like these weird edge cases, right? There could be unexpected behavior.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so now we refactor more because the point is all the tests that you wrote already should still be passing. So we should have like the goal is 7 passing tests right now.
All right.
And by the yeah, go ahead.
You should know that my door was closed and Tuna has barged in specifically so he can enjoy his blanket.
Tuna! Woo!
He
Oh
heard
my
his
gosh.
name enough time. Okay, so we can refactor.
Yeah.
We're pair programming, so how would you go about this? Because I have my own thoughts, but if we're pairing, I'd love to know kind of how you would, what your next steps would be for this.
I'm reading. Hold on.
Let me give you a little more breathing room, perhaps.
Oh, well, I really actually wouldn't do anything very complicated at this time. I would be like, I'd be a lazy developer, and I'd be like, Ben, you're my it's on you, Ben. So
Okay.
what I would write would be the simplest thing.
All right. So the simplest thing.
If
it's 15, return Tuna Ben. Okay.
Yeah, and then I'd, ping pong. It's Ben's turn. Not my problem. Until until it comes back to me. Yeah.
Alan, welcome. The Edge Cases is now the name of my new band, by the way, is what he says.
I love that.
Incredible.
So we've got 7. Okay, write another failing test.
All right.
So what is a multiple of 5 and 3?
I'm gonna do 45. And it's gonna be all red, very, very red. All right, so
I would probably say if the number is 15 or 45. Like seriously, yeah.
Okay.
Or I liked how you had it. Like like the yeah.
All right.
It's painfully.
Mm-hmm.
It's a painful small step. Like it feels uncomfortable, but what we're doing right now, Ben, is we're auditing our logic. We're really making sure that the way we think it works is how it works.
Okay.
Like you could do this without coffee early on a Monday morning.
I really like that you picked such a simple example because like my instinct keeps like going up. I'm like, I just want to like write the thing. Like I know how to do FizzBuzz. I know how to do tunabet, right? Like let me just do that. Then I can write the test after. Like I'll like got killer tests for that. And so this demo is really like forcing me to like slow down and like I really like that. So okay. But
it feels like we're on the same page, and like the verbal conversation that we're having is very good and explicit. So if we were pair programming on more complicated logic, it would sound similar. Or maybe I would say, hey, write this, and you would give me immediate feedback of, wait, I understand it like this. And because we're writing the test now and not backfilling them later, we're like in a code review. Like seriously, this whole thing becomes a code review, and we're gonna catch like those mistakes and check each other's work like now and not later. It can make code review shorter later for whoever had that question earlier about saving time. Yeah, but just write one more failing test. So test number 9 is another multiple of 5 and 3.
All right, another multiple of 5 and 3, 60.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Okay.
All right.
And so now we're at 3. Now we can refactor.
Oh.
So on line 7, you could do num and then divided and then 15 if it So you're like copying 11, but in line 11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
there we go. Okay.
This is how you're proposing it. Yeah, because the other way we could do it is if like num percent 3 equals 0 and num percent 5 equals 0. But because 3 and 5 are prime, we know that 3 times 5 will be a factor of any number that's a multiple of both 3 and 5. So, yep.
Okay. So we're doing amazing on time. Do you mind running the like NPM run coverage? Like, do you think we're at 100%?
Wait, NPM run coverage? Is that just a
or
test?
However you get your coverage for just Yeah, I think that's right.
That's a
No.
script that we have to add.
Oh, okay.
Let's find out.
I think there's a way in IntelliJ to test your um like test coverage.
Is
And
it a
so
coverage
yeah.
command? Like, is it a coverage package that we would get? Is this does this look familiar?
Yes, it looks familiar. We could try it, and if it doesn't work,
Oh,
we
Pritam
can go over it.
Pritam's
But the
got us covered. Pritam's got
oh,
us.
nice. Okay.
npm. I
Yeah.
think we can do npm run test dash dash coverage.
Okay.
Because Pritam's saying just dash dash coverage.
Okay.
No. Okay, that's not in here, but we can. What we can do is, I think, add a new script here.
Can I talk while you're typing?
Go ahead. Well,
Okay. Yeah. So the theory here is you may or may not have a coding standard to have X% coverage. And this doesn't look quite right because we're not getting any numbers. It must not have the right path because in this table we should see the names of the files.
Okay. That's interesting. I've never actually seen the Jest coverage command. That's
Yeah.
Let's find out. We probably need to pass it the file name, is my guess. You need a JS file. Um, does that Pritam, are you saying that we need to pass a Oh, you need a JS file for which a test.js file is there.
Oh,
Okay,
great
gotcha.
catch. Okay, yeah, because we wrote it in one file. That okay, got it.
Got it.
You would want your source code and your test code separate. Okay, but the theory still works here. You may not personally care about test coverage if you work by yourself or if you work in a small team that you really trust. But the more hands are in the code base, like the nicer it is to know that the code that you're trying to do a pull request on, it really has been vetted. And because we wrote the tests at the same time as the source code, we didn't accidentally write untestable code. Okay. And what I mean by that is if you are combining too many things, you're ignoring solid principles, you can write some like gnarly methods that are like doing a ton of stuff that are like super hard to go back and test. Has that ever happened to you?
Oh, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. And so, I mean, this kind of saves you the time and frustration that way. Everything is so simple and isolated. Yeah, that having that daunting high test coverage of like 95 or even 100, it's attainable and it's realistic. Yeah.
That's also interesting because I know part of collecting metrics is being able to like tell the story of your team, right? And sometimes just for like political optics reasons you want to be able to tell a really nice story, right? So having like being able to test like to surface your coverage like can be awfully convenient for that kind of stuff. You can show like, hey, we've been growing over time, our coverage has been getting better, and that can also tell a compelling story. So it's an interesting way in which writing tests like this can put your team in a better position, even if it doesn't change anything about the code per se.
Yep. And yeah, your needs though for testing, it can really just depend. Like if this is your project you do for fun, you're not gonna have an outage. And if it's your personal website, you may not be afraid of an outage because oh no, someone can't read your blog. but like for critical systems or even just things where you start to have customers and you're worried about things like availability. Yeah, so I don't want to mislead you. High unit test coverage doesn't mean you're like bulletproof for outages. Not at all. But it can kind of eliminate an area of suspicion. And what I mean by that is like if you ever have a defect, like a small defect or even a big outage, like being able to debug and look at your tests, help you like know what has been looked into, and you
Mhm.
can focus on something maybe like in an integration test or something that like the other things that like weren't looked into as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned that having high test coverage doesn't necessarily mean your code is bulletproof. Can
Right.
you give some examples of why that might be the case and what you might do about that?
Okay, totally. Um, so like in today when we were doing the multiples of like 5 and 3, I said that 60 was a multiple of 5 and 3, and you agreed. But guess what? We might have actually abstracted the business logic wrong. And so even though the test is passing, you can still have a kink in your logic. And hopefully that would be caught by code review. But as you write more tests later, there is a like higher chance you would meet it. And remember, like when Shan said, "Okay, do we do other forms of testing?" So holistically, you would likely complement your unit testing with other things such as manual testing and like the end to end. And so a lot of your applications will have like a front end. So as a user, like QA may catch that, or maybe you're your own QA. These are like some guardrails. There's another thing that is out of scope for today, but I'd love to come back and talk about mutation testing. And yeah, if anyone wants to search for a mutation testing, it is like a whole nother level of quality.
Can you
But
can,
that's a different.
well, can
But
you give like a one or two sentence like elevator pitch for mutation testing?
okay, um, mutation testing will catch like very strange and unique edge cases that you probably won't because it's running like it's mutating your code. Um, and so, do you feel like most of your audience is front end?
Yeah, I would say that's probably pretty fair.
Okay, so there's like a lot of tools, but the leading tool for JavaScript mutation testing is Stryker, Stryker, and it has fantastic documentation. Honestly, if you read the documentation, I might not need to come back because it explains it so well. But yeah, that's something that can like fortify your confidence in your tests.
So the
Yeah,
way I've heard it explained, right, is because you could in theory write your tests in such a way that you get like 100% code coverage, right? Like you write one test that pulls in every function, every class, every file from your code base, but then at the end of that test, you could expect true to be true. And you, in theory, as far as automated tools can detect, you've technically tested 100% code coverage, but your test is not meaningful in any way, right?
yep,
So, the way I've heard it is mutation testing ensures that the other tests that you've written are quality tests by introducing deliberate bugs into your code. It changes up your code in some way to force your unit tests to fail. And then it surfaces, hey, how many of your tests actually failed? If very few of your tests failed, you're probably not testing anything of value. Um,
absolutely.
so that's the way I've heard it pitched.
Yeah, I have heard it pitched that way as well. Um, yeah, and so like on that note, like today was pretty simple. We just wrote a few tests. It really scales well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, having more seats. Yeah, and so like in the outage example that I gave, um, it is pretty rare to have an outage caused by a JavaScript um like defect, but it does still happen, and there are I've read postmortems where they say at the end, what are our action items, or what could we put in place so this doesn't reoccur. They say, did we test enough, like were there enough,
Mm-hmm.
all types of tests including unit testing. So when you like take advantage of this unit testing, and it's not adding more time, like we're doing it at the same time, you just kind of remove that from the equation so you can focus on like the other areas
Hmm.
where things might, yeah, be bad. Yeah.
Okay, I've got another question for you, which is that in
Okay.
this process,
Hmm.
um, where do edge cases best fit in? Because we, for instance, did not
Ooh,
test like the
okay. Yeah,
number
yeah, yeah.
0. We didn't
Okay,
test
yes, yes.
values that aren't
Okay.
numbers, right? Like there
Yeah.
are edge cases that we haven't tested.
Okay. So, I wasn't sure if we'd have time for this, but we do. I like to use an acronym. It is in and then zombies,
Okay.
and that stands for, it's like a mnemonic device. So we don't really have a lot of time to get into it, but like N is for null, and then Z is for zero, the O is for one, and so you drive out these edge cases. And so let me drop some literature about that into the chat. And so, um, in zombies is not a tool or a framework. It's like just a schema for like as a human how you would like logic to have your those discover those edge cases. Um, I'm dropping it. Okay, and I think that's okay. So it's actually two links. I'll put a space, but yeah, so by doing that, you're gonna have a lot more than 7 tests, and that is okay. It's okay if a file this short has a good like 20 tests. You probably won't see performance issues or like it's taking too long to run. If you do, that is a really well documented thing. There's strategies to speed up your unit test runtime. Um, but like ideally, you would do TDD all throughout your development cycle, and you would use like this type of schema to catch those edge cases of like, what if we give it null, like we don't give it a number, or what if we give it a number that's outside like a boundary and things like that. So yep, just to summarize, in addition to the TDD cycle of red green refactor, in zombies it's like a helpful strategy. And then I like mutation testing to check my work. But if that doesn't, fit your project needs, a lot of times human code review can catch those things. Yeah.
All right. Awesome. I know we've got a few minutes, so I want to make sure that we're getting to some questions from the chat. So if you've got any, go ahead and put them in there. I'm going to scroll through and see if there's anything I missed. I do know that there was one from Makar who's asking, are unit tests for object-oriented programming code bases harder than functional programming? I don't know. Do you have experience in that regard, Adrian?
So I primarily have object-oriented programming experience. Um, I don't actually know, but that'd be a cool
Mm-hmm.
thing for me to research and get back to y'all on. If I had to guess, they would be equally difficult,
Okay.
but that is just a guess. Yeah.
Right. Let's see. Scrolling through. Um, let's see. Codelex asked a while back, and so maybe you feel like we've already gotten to this, but how do you recommend to plan out your test cases by function, feature, module, and so on?
Hmm. Um, Repeat it one more time. By what was it? Function.
Yeah. I scrolled down. By function, feature, module, and so on. So I'm wondering if the question at hand is like, how do you break up like a testable chunk of the code? And how do you test those chunks? What scale are you kind of thinking at?
Yeah. So if you go back to the code, like we had a describe statement up at the top that said describe tuna bean or bin. um, you can have different describe blocks, and that is one way to organize your test file. So this was just testing the tuna bin functionality. Like so you can um, have multiple, and they're all in this test file, but they are different test blocks. Does that make sense? That's like one
Mm-hmm.
way. Another way is today we did it all in one file, but traditionally you'll see one JavaScript file and one correlating test file, and that's for unit. But so like your other types of testing, like your end-to-end or integration, those are typically another file. So like if you use Cypress, for example, for your end-to-end testing, you would have a folder of Cypress tests. Yeah. And you would run those within your TDD cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We got a question from Dan. Do you have any advice on convincing a really small team that's already feeling overcommitted to adopt
Yeah.
TDD practices?
So Ben, can you drop my Twitter?
Yes, yes, I
And
can.
yeah, and so I don't know if you're on Twitter. I hope you are, and I hope we can have a longer conversation there for more to see. I think that's like a really common thing, and I was fortunate because my whole team was buying into it at the same time. But if you're trying to build a business case for it, it can feel hard, and I have empathy for that. So to oversimplify it, do you want to go fast or you want to go far? So this is something that seems like it slows you down, but like it really pays off later. It saves you time in the code review. It saves you time if there is a defect or an outage, and it saves you time as more and more hands are in the project, and as you scale and like make the project bigger and bigger. Yeah, and so I don't know if you mean peer developers or if you mean buy-in from like a scrum master, right? Or like a manager. So if you can talk to me on Twitter, I'd like to talk about that side of it too. Like, how do we make the business case for this process? There
Dan,
are cost benefit analysis, and yeah, like they've really studied this. This has been around since the 90s, and people have solved your problem, so we'll find that and we'll get that to you.
Dan did clarify that he meant both, like the Scrum Master
Okay,
side, the business side,
that's like
and the
okay,
dev
yep,
side. Yeah.
yep.
All
And
right.
you'll probably need to fit your business case to the audience, right? Devs care about different things sometimes. Okay.
Yep. Tom says measure how much time you spend on testing your app after a small code change. Is
That's a good
probably
one.
one way. Yeah. And I think it's all trade offs, right? Because like it's not like you're gonna be skipping out on the testing anyways, right? Like what you don't do in your unit testing, you're gonna end up doing in your manual testing, right? Like
Yes.
stuff like that, right? So it's like shifting the cost of do your devs want to be doing the repetitive brute like manual test work every time they make a change, or do they want to just let the like intelligent speedy bot handle that? And I'm gonna pick the bot every time. um yeah. uh Adrian, thank you so much for coming on. I hope you had fun, and chat, I hope y'all had a blast as well. You should join us. Oh god, that's the stream manager. You should join us next week, 12 p.m. Central Time. My friend Ashley Nelms, who I consider my user experience partner in crime, is coming on. She's going to talk to us about design tokens and specifically how we can use design tokens to scale up accessibility. If you want to get notifications about upcoming streams, go follow us on Twitter at some